Hey, shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom, Makam, which is peace unto you all. Anachna Wahai Barsha Allah with the Hebrew Israelites coming to you week in and week out through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. To preach to you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, West Indians, Haitians, and Israelite foreigners. Chamatam Kayab. Hamalakwath Hashemayim Kwara, repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. First and foremost, before we get started, we're going to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Wachah, Wadash. Double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone that taught us the truth and rule well. Much respect to you, bros, out there pushing the truth with all righteousness and sincere shalom, shalom. Excuse me. Jay dealing with a little cold, but essentially, as the lesson is entitled, it says it is better to trust in the Lord, and which is always it's great to trust in the Lord, because ultimately in trusting in the Lord, essentially we receive stability as these people essentially are starting to be upheaval and disorientated in the mind, all right, and essentially in their spirits, all right. Essentially, we have stability, true stability. So, could we get Isaiah 33 and verse 6? Bible Shop, you didn't have nothing?
Okay. It's the book of Isaiah, chapter 33 and verse 6. And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure.
Right. So, ultimately, it says wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times. Ultimately we have a true state of being stable and understanding, what we should be doing in these times, because again, contrary to those of this world, we're essentially abiding in the rock Yahweh Shai, so we understand the things that are essentially coming down the pipeline of prophecy,
Okay. That word.
mm.
I was just gonna get that word for stability. It's H530. It says firmness, fidelity, going into your faith, steadfastness, steadiness. And you read this in the NLT, it talks about having a sure foundation, right? So when you're founded on that rock being Yahweh Shai, right, you can't be moved, man, right? When that wisdom, knowledge, and understanding is the basis, the start, right, of where the point where you move from, right, where you make your decisions from, right? That's where that true stability comes from, right? And that goes into as we're touching on trust, man, right? Because when you trust in something, you're putting your whole faith into it,
Right, because you mentioned the word fidelity, that goes into that firmness and that faith. We are ultimately putting our faith in the Lord, But I got this real fast. This is Psalms chapter 118, and we'll get verse 8. And it says, it is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man, in which, the man Israelite man, woman, and child is essentially created, to fear the Lord, which 2/3 are not ultimately going to fear the Lord on their side. The elect is ultimately going to fear the Lord, and in the fear of the Lord, essentially, it corresponds, it parallels, with the trust. All right, so I want to get that word for trust. And it says batach, excuse me. I want to get that word for confidence. And it says batach. It's built up, all right, because in Hebrew we build, we wouldn't necessarily spell. It says ba, ta, and cha. All right, that ba goes into a house, the ta goes into surround, and then the cha ultimately goes into a fence. Because when you put a fence around the house, because building up this word, the ba again is a house, the ta is ta and I, which means to surround, all right, and the cha is that fence, so a house surrounded by a fence ultimately has firmness, fidelity, all right, it's protected, all right, and ultimately that's something that can be confided in, and essentially going into the scripture, it says Psalms 118 and verse 8, it says it is better to trust in the Lord, so ultimately our protection will be of the Lord, and that's why it says, to put our confidence in the Lord. It says it is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. It will be vain, it will be fickle ultimately to put, trust in man, So from there, could we get you have anything, bro?
I kind of got one for you.
Okay.
So Proverbs 29 and verse 25. The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. Right? So, like you titled it, it's better to trust in the Lord, because when you trust in anything else, you'll find yourself being trapped right in the things of this world, man. Right? There's nothing else that's gonna free you outside of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. Right? The Lord is allowing that safety. He's providing that safety rather for his elect. So that scriptures talk about him keeping us, man. Right? To be kept is to be guarded. But you can't be guarded, when you trust in Esau either, man, or when you trust in your own devices, ultimately.
Right. Got a quick precept. This is Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 1. And it says, "Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me, and that cover with a covering, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin." All right. And ultimately, woe goes into, destruction and misery. All right. So 2/3, the rebellious children are going to be in a state to where by, by subscribing to, the benefits and stuff like that in Esau Edom's captivity, they're ultimately going to be destroyed for doing so. I'm going to read this again. It says, "Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel." They're ultimately counseling with Esau Edom. It says, "But not of me." They haven't went to the prophets. All right. It says, and that cover with the covering, because when we go into that word batach, ultimately that's confiding in some type of covering and receiving of some type of protection. All right. Which the ultimate form of protection, that we should be seeking after is the protection with the Lord, Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai. All right. It says, Isaiah 30 and verse 1, it says, "That cover with the covering, but not of my spirit." Ultimately going into Proverbs, the first chapter and the 32nd verse, that false sense of protection and abundance. So it says, "But not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin." It says that walk to go down into Egypt, in which Egypt essentially represents bondage, captivity. That walk to go down into Egypt and have not asked at my mouth, to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh. Because ultimately the scriptures go into how, some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, roughly paraphrasing, but we will put our trust in the Lord, because you got people that ultimately confide and trust, and they find their abode, or, where they reside with carnal means. That's what it means to put confidence in man. And then also to go down to Egypt, essentially trusting in carnal benefits. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, that walk to go down into Egypt and have not asked at my mouth, to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. A shadow represents protection. So it says, "Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion." And ultimately those, because Jake has been involved in this system in America, Babylon the Great. Jake is fully vested. Excuse me. So reading it back, it says, "Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion." Ultimately, Jake, being that Jake has their minds invested in this place in captivity, a lot of them trusted in the so-called Great White Hope. So that's essentially their shame and confusion. Right now, as this place continues to spiral downhill, circle the drain. Ultimately, Jake is in a confused type of a state. Because they didn't ultimately confide in the true form of stability.
Right.
But from there, could we get, you had something, bro?
I'll hold it. You go ahead, give it.
Could we get could you get Matthew 7 and 24?
Okay. This is Matthew chapter 7 and verse 24. "Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house on a rock."
So whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, so it can't just stop at the hearing of the word. We ultimately have to apply the word to do it.
Okay. Verse 25. "And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock."
Right, and the house being, that believer, specifically the man, and ultimately, that when the rains descend, all right, when all the different adversities that was mentioned in that scriptures, when all the adversities come down upon the planet Earth, being prophecy, ultimately the elect individual, starting with the man, is going to be ultimately covered, because essentially the elect are going to have put their trust in the Lord, and it's spiritual, that rock was used for this precept, you see, because a rock ultimately provides for stability.
Exactly. It's verse 26. And the rain descended. It's like 26. And everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand.
Right, because in these times, everybody is ultimately, going after, some type of stability. Or you have those that are, scriptures say, a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth themselves. So those that are prudent are ultimately hiding themselves in the true form of stability, the Lord Yahweh Shai. All right, but then those that are seeking some type of stability, in carnal means, those of this world, they're essentially, chasing after the sand. They're building their foundation in the sand. That's what they're looking to trust in, and that sand essentially, when you think about sand, it's like you'll pick it up with your hands and it dissipates in your hand. So essentially, it shows that it's very fickle, vain, and ultimately, it's not a true form of sureness and firmness. It's not true stability. It's just something that it's here one moment in your hands and then it's gone.
Mhm. Okay. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it.
Right. And it's starting to reveal, the two foundations, because when we go into the subtitle in the blue letter, it mentions the two foundations. You have those that ultimately had that firm, that stable, that trusty foundation, but then you had the ones that essentially were reaching for vanity and things that they felt as if was going to deliver them. I'm gonna get a quick precept. This is Psalms chapter 20, and we'll give verse 7. And it says, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, our power. So you got those that are essentially trusting in those carnal means. All right. And, essentially with the, well, they don't really have any understanding in the world, but those things that they're ultimately confiding in, again, they don't offer any type of stability, and that's why we're seeing a lot of people starting to bug out, because they don't ultimately have what's going to deliver in the elect. They don't ultimately have a spirit dealing with them. So those that are in a good estate currently right now, we're starting to see the tables turn.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If I can, I got this word for founded, right, as we read in that Matthew 7:25. Because it speaks on uh, G23:11, to make stable, to establish, right? But when you go into the root word, uh, themelios, it says metaphorically the foundations, beginnings, first principles, right? It says the intuition or system of truth, right? So when your first principles, your foundation, right, the beginnings of your trust in the Lord is rooted in truth, then you're gonna have that stability, man. Right? You have that solid foundation. People who believe in a system of lies have that foundation of sand, right? That can be easily swayed and moved, man. Right? But we're sturdily, founded in the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai,
I got a quick one because I'm gonna get this real fast. This is Psalm, or not Psalms, Bon Sirach, chapter 2, and let me see. The scripture talks about it says somebody without a God, it's better to have a guide or something like that. It's in Sirach somewhere. I can't remember where it's at.
Let's see if I can find it.
Okay. But I'm gonna get this real fast as you look for that. I'm gonna get Ecclesiastes chapter 12, and we'll get verse 11. Because we ultimately understand again what's coming down with prophecy. As this world is focused on the like entertainment, and the different distractions that Esau is putting out there. Essentially the elect is keeping their eye single and on the straight gate. So this is Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 11. I'm starting at verse 9, and it says, "And moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yet he gave good heed and sought out and set in order many proverbs." All right, and the thing about proverbs, it goes back to similitudes, but it's similitudes on to how to rule. How to have dominion. And it says the preacher sought out the preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. And when you compare it to Esau, Edom's society, all right, scriptures say that he writes grievousness, which he has prescribed. So that grievousness goes back to something that is it's not balanced. It's not written in true equity and verity. All right, when we read this again, Ecclesiastes 12:10, it says, the preacher sought out, the preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. Essentially these scriptures is upright, and it keeps us to where we're judging and we're essentially thinking in a balanced state. It says, verse 11, the words of the wise are as golds, and as nails fastened by the masters of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. And essentially we're putting our trust in the Lord, Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai, who is our shepherd. And the thing about a shepherd is ultimately that shepherd is looking after the well-being of the flock. All right. So as again, likening those of the world, to animals. All right, we're listening to our shepherd. We have true stability. Those and the other animals are essentially in a state of confusion. They're disorientated. All right, and essentially they're to where they don't know what's going on. That's why scriptures say there shall be a crying for wine in the streets. Because as these things is essentially going on. All right, the rest of the people they don't really have any type of thing to trust in and to confide in, and their foundation is being found out to be of no value, no benefit. I'm gonna read it again. Were you able to find it, bro?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Could you read that, and I'm gonna read this after that.
So Sirach 20 and verse 32. Necessary patience in seeking the Lord is better than he that leadeth his life without a guide.
It said necessary patience. You see, because we're on the straight gate, all right, and essentially we're being guided on that straight gate as pursuant to Psalm the 17th chapter and the 8th verse. The Lord said He will guide us with His eye, because He's watching over us. So it said necessary patience because ultimately, through the different obstacles we're being grown, and that's why I said in the opening precept that we got, Psalms 118:8, it is better to trust in the Lord. You see, because the Lord is ultimately growing us to where we can ultimately pretty much to where we're growing on the straight gate, and we're able to again have stability, as these times grow more perilous. Could you read that back?
Okay. Sirach chapter 20 and verse 32. Necessary patience in seeking the Lord is better than he that leadeth his life without a guide.
And those that don't have a guide, all right, those that don't have the words of the wise, those that don't have that gold, because a gold, as mentioned in Ecclesiastes 12:11, it says the words of the wise are as golds. A gold is something that essentially urges us, So it's like the Lord is urging us on that straight gate. He's pushing us this way, He's pushing us that way because He's watching over us. Because the Lord has the ultimate view. He has that for lack of better words, the bird's eye view. He can see everything. He's the one that's moving the chess pieces. But reading this back, it says Ecclesiastes 12:11. It says the words of the wise are as golds and as nails fastened by the masters of assemblies. The word ultimately it fastens us as well. It says which are given for one shepherd. That the Lord. That's why Scripture said the Lord is our shepherd. We shall not want. Roughly paraphrasing. Because we have ultimately everything that we need. In His truth and trusting in the Lord. But those outside of the sanctuary of the Lord, they don't have a guide, so therefore they don't have any type of stability in these times that we're in.
Okay, I got one for you real quick. This is Psalm 34 and verse 8. It reads, "O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in Him. Fear the Lord, ye His saints, for there is no want to them that fear Him." Right. So there's no lack, right, in those who fear Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. Right. There's nothing missing from us. We have everything we need, and if we don't have it, the Lord is preparing it to be given to us, man. Right. But that only comes from trusting in Him. Right. It's only a blessing to those who trust in Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. Verse 10, it says, "The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they that seek the Lord shall not want any good thing." Right? So we're not going to be in the time of wanting, right, once we see, right, the system start to collapse, man. Right, we're already, we've been given our daily bread. We've been given what we need to persist, right? But again, going back to that Sirach, uh, 20 and 32, it talks about necessary patience, man. Right, that being willing to suffer, right, and waiting for the Lord to do His will, man. You know.
Okay. I got one more now. That pretty much be it. If you ain't none, bro.
Okay.
God, this is Ayawab Job chapter 23 and verse 10. It says, "But he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold." Because ultimately, Job was a member of the elect. All right, and the elect is essentially going to be tried forth as that gold in the fire, as pursuant to Bonsrat, the second chapter. Because when a goldsmith or a smith puts some type of precious metal into that fire, essentially it wants to be he wanted to see if it's going to be a good piece of metal. So that's the same process that's being done with the elect. The Lord's essentially putting the elect through that fire, being the different adversities in the straight gate. All right, and ultimately at the end, the elect is ultimately going to have come forth in the Lord's image, and His likeness. So this is Job 23 and verse 10. It says, "But he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. My foot hath held his steps. His way have I kept and not declined." Because the word offers true stability. Something that we can bite down on, like how they say in different fighting sports. Like bite down on your mouthpieces. It's something that we can essentially confide in. It's true. So it says, "My foot hath held his steps. His way have I kept and not declined. Neither have I gone back from the commandment of his lips. I have esteemed the words of his mouth more than my necessary food." So ultimately, going back to the point that essentially that this word is all that we need. Because the Lord offers true stability.
That's it.
So that's pretty much all I had, bro.
Got.
Wait, I don't want to Zaza by Naya Paulos. That was a beautiful edification to the spirit. Well, we can go ahead and close it up by saying, "Call light and law. Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rocha, Wadashwa, double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone that taught us truth and rule well. Much respect to you, bros, out there pushing this truth with all righteousness and sincere shalom, shalom.
Shalom.